For at least a half decade, the NBA has been pretty clearly trending in a couple directions. Time and again, we've seen the raw power of overwhelming offense dictate results as teams grow more and more potent there. Like, we saw the all-time record for offensive rating broken last year, then we saw it shattered by 7 teams this season. I'd call that a trend. Additionally, we've obviously seen the assembly of super teams, defined by 2 or 3 massive stars with the parts around them mostly thrown together, take top priority around the league, as 3 of the last 4 titles were won by teams who arguably had 2 top 5 players in the entire league. The Warriors may have been the exception among super teams in how well built of a team they were, as their championship foundation pre-existed Durant, but look at the Miami Heat teams who preceded them, or the Lakers and Nets teams that have come after, and it's pretty clear that generally, supporting cast for those teams are kind of just made up of whatever you can muster, a sacrifice many organizations are understandably willing to make for a pair or trio of supernova talents. But this strange year, albeit undeniably altered by injuries, has pretty aggressively bucked those trends. Look around at the 4 teams remaining and you see nothing resembling, at the very least, a healthy super team, no squad with 2 top 5 players in basketball, none of the top 3 MVP candidates from this season, no LeBron, no KD, just 4 really good, 2-way, deep basketball teams. Personally, I find that pretty interesting. So today, let's take a look at how defense and depth have defined the 2021 NBA playoffs. Let's start by looking at how, miraculously, it has been the great defensive teams to survive thus far. As I said earlier, over the past 5 years, it seems that it was established, then reestablished, over and over and over, that offense just matters more than defense in today's NBA. From 2016 through 2020, the last 5 postseasons, 13 of 20 teams to reach the conference finals, a healthy majority, had a top 5 playoff offense, while just 5 of 20 had a top 5 playoff defense. We've seen plenty of teams make deep runs in the last half decade with flat-out subpar defensive units. In fact, 5 squads made the conference finals in that stretch with a playoff defense outside of the top 10. Keep in mind that's out of just 16 teams, while it proved almost impossible to achieve that same feat with a subpar offense, as just 1 team that ranked outside the top 10 on that end made a conference finals run. The 2016 Raptors, who struggled mightily to get to that point in a weak East, and then lost 3 separate games by more than 25 points to the Cavs in their conference finals defeat. We can go on and on with the stats here, but this trend just also makes a great deal of sense. Great offensive engines and big-time shot makers dictate outcomes because their skill sets are harder to replicate. And with offensive players more skilled than ever and with spacing at an all-time high, it's just harder to find guys who can wreck the game defensively and truly take away what those superb offensive players want to do. Well, these playoffs have been different. Right now, the top 2 playoff defenses are remaining, which is remarkably the first time that's happened since 2010, and all 4 teams left standing are among the top 8 playoff defenses. So clearly, defense has mattered. But what's even crazier is that only 1 above-average playoff offense is still standing, the first time that's been the case in the conference finals since 2003. The Suns, Hawks, and Bucks are currently holding down the 10 through 12 spots in playoff offensive rating, ahead of only 4 teams who lost in the first round. And they're all still here. They've made it to this point on the back of defense. If you look at any one of these rosters, you'll find defensive difference makers. The Bucks, who boast the number 1 defense in these playoffs, have an abundance. They have Brook Lopez, a massive deterrent on the interior, who's held opponents a ridiculous 16% below their typical field goal percentage inside of 6 feet in these playoffs, the second best mark of 26 players who defend at least 4 such shots per game. They have Giannis Antetokounmpo, a masterful help-side rim protector who, with his absurd athleticism and 7'3" wingspan, has held opponents an even crazier 22.6% below their average in that area, while also operating as a high-level perimeter stopper. And they have Drew Holiday, who's holding opponents nearly 5% below their average field goal percentage and earned first-team all-defense honors this year, along with Giannis, thanks to his tremendous IQ, physicality, and hands defensively. The Suns, the number 2 defense in these playoffs, have DeAndre Ayton, who's had a massive impact as a rim protector, intimidating anybody who dares enter his paint and holding opponents nearly 5% below their typical field goal percentage inside of 6 feet, and as a one-on-one post defender, limiting Anthony Davis to 40% shooting in their first-round matchup and holding Nikola Jokic to his worst field goal percentage in any playoff series to date, forcing him into tough shots with his ridiculous 7'6" wingspan and sturdy 250-pound frame, while also limiting Jokic's playmaking impact by ensuring that the Suns didn't have to send double teams often, a luxury very few teams have against the Serbian big man. With Ayton as their interior stopper, the Suns can sick the freakishly long Mikal Bridges on an opposing team's best perimeter player, with another major plus defender in the mix in Jay Crowder, who can hang both on the perimeter and the interior. The Clippers are the lowest defensively rated team of this group during the playoffs, but that number is negatively skewed by the fact that they've had to face 3 of the regular season's top 8 offenses in Dallas, Utah, and Phoenix. In big-time situations and throughout this series against the Suns, they have undeniably shown that they can reach a very high level defensively. The Clips are defined by their quickness on that end, capable of rotating sharply and battling in many matchups with small ball lineups that feature Nick Batum at the 5, and have a number of feisty defenders on the perimeter, including Pat Bev, who has held opponents to a ridiculous 38% shooting in these playoffs and has played a major role in Devin Booker's struggles over the last 3 games, Terrence Mann, who has held opponents nearly 6% below their average shooting in these playoffs, and Paul George, a 4-time all-defense selection. After getting torched by Donovan Mitchell in the first couple games against Utah, the Clips were able to make him labor for his buckets inside the arc down the stretch in that series and found success sending doubles his way. And, perhaps unexpectedly, they were able to make Chris Paul struggle mightily out of the pick and roll for 2 games by switching the lengthy Ivica Zubac, another effective pure rim protector, onto him to affect his signature mid-range pull-ups and limit him to 11 of 41 shooting in games 3 and 4 combined. Finally, the Hawks may have the least sparkling personnel defensively, with DeAndre Hunter, their best perimeter defender, out due to injury, but they have one of the best pure rim protectors in basketball in Clint Capella, who holds opponents nearly 10% below their average field goal percentage inside of 6 feet. As a group, the Hawks were able to force Julius Randle into one of the worst volume shooting series ever in the first round, keeping him below 30%, and they then held the Sixers to an offensive rating of 111.5 in their second round matchup, about 10 points lower than the number Philly posted in the previous round against Washington. We may think of Atlanta as an offensive team, but consistently throughout these playoffs, their defense has been the statistically stronger side of the ball. So, given that we know that NBA teams love to follow trends, is this a template everybody should follow for team building? Focus on defense above all else? Well, not really, because that's not actually what these teams have done. In fact, during the regular season, only the Suns ranked higher in defensive rating than they did in offensive rating out of this group by a grand total of 1 spot. There's a reason the Magic didn't go all the way in the previous 2 playoffs, and there's a reason the Knicks or the AD-less Lakers went down in an ugly fashion in the first round this year. Great defenses may have dominated these playoffs, but you need offensive punch to have a chance. All 4 of these teams can shoot the hell out of the ball, and all of them have multiple high-level creators, which is directly tied to part 2 of what has defined these playoffs and why these are the 4 teams who have survived: depth. Now, this makes sense particularly because of how much injuries have played a factor this year, dramatically impacting teams like the Lakers and Nets, but also none of the teams left standing have made it through the playoffs untouched there. The Clippers managed to pull off consecutive wins against the Jazz without their best player in Kawhi Leonard. The Suns got out against the Lakers, even with Chris Paul as a non-factor due to injury for the majority of the series, and they pulled off games 1 and 2 against the Clippers with CP out entirely due to COVID. The Hawks have kept on chugging without DeAndre Hunter, and while the Bucks have certainly been the most fortunate of the group in regards to injury, they're still without one of their 5 best players in Dante DiVincenzo. Clearly, though, each team has been well equipped to overcome such hurdles. Let's start by looking at the personnel of the Clips, who are clearly missing the biggest piece of the bunch. Depth has been utterly essential to LA's run. They've started 8 different guys at least once in these playoffs and have played 10 players at least 14 minutes a game, a ridiculous number. They've been able to tinker with all sorts of lineups, leaning on small ball groups for huge minutes in the first 2 series, in which Zubac was nearly unplayable, as the Clippers were about 30 points per 100 possessions worse with him on the floor. But then, Zubac played at a phenomenal level against the Suns, putting in over 30 minutes a night and averaging 13 and 11 with a plus 25 overall plus-minus, battling with DeAndre Ayton and, as I mentioned earlier, holding his own out of the pick and roll defensively. When he then missed Game 5 due to injury, the Clips again found success going small and got massive production from Boogie Cousins, a clean scratch in many games these playoffs, who notched 15 points and 3 assists in 11 minutes. But the Clips have been able to try various options at the guard spot as well. Against Dallas, they lean on Rajon Rondo for his savvy playmaking and playoff experience, and ever since, they've benefited from the shooting and defense of Pat Bev instead. Early on against the Mavs, Luke Kennard couldn't get on the floor. Now he's had an impact as a dead-eye shooter, knocking down better than 44% of his threes. And because of the nature of their deadly shooting as a group that shot better than 41% in the regular season, with 9 guys who were 39% or better from deep, they've seen role guys step up and get hot in massive moments. In Game 7 versus Dallas in the first round, Marcus Morris stepped up with 23 points and 7 made threes, and in Game 6 against Utah, Terrence Mann miraculously found his way to a 39-piece with, again, 7 made threes. Without performances like those and the personnel adjustments that enabled their success in specific matchups, the Clippers undeniably would not be here. Opposite them, the Suns have also been bestowed with a variety of difference makers, notably including starters like Ayton, Bridges, and Crowder, but with some legitimate bench guys as well, as they boast 6 double-digit scores in these playoffs. Most notably, when Chris Paul was not himself against the Lakers, it was the slithery, nifty Cam Payne who stepped up as a phenomenal secondary creator, averaging 16 points and 4.5 assists per game over a 4-game stretch, penetrating the paint for his signature scoop finishes and finding the open man around him consistently. When Paul couldn't play at all in games 1 and 2 of the Western Conference Finals, Payne took it up another level, averaging a massive 20 points and 9 assists per game and delivering much-needed big-time shot-making and high-level playmaking in 2 narrow Phoenix victories. Cam has, throughout this whole year, been one of the best bench players in basketball, but it's been on full display in these playoffs, and his impact on winning has been huge, as lineups featuring Payne and Booker have been significantly better offensively than lineups featuring CP and Booker this postseason. Without Cam, that Lakers series gets a lot tougher, and they would almost certainly be down 3-2 to the Clippers right now, sitting on the brink of elimination, if not for his masterful showing in Game 2. Alongside him, though, they get big-time shooting from Cam Johnson, high-level defense from Torrey Craig, and a bit of everything from Dario Saric, who's capable of attacking out of the post and from beyond the arc as a scorer and is a savvy passer. There's a reason the Suns were able to win 2 of 3 games in this series in a stretch in which Devin Booker and Chris Paul both endured brutal shooting nights consecutively, as they shot at a 30.5 and under 27% clip, respectively, in games 2 through 4. They have guys who can step up and make an impact everywhere, and they are as much defined by that depth of quality players as they are by their 2-star guards leading the charge. Out east, the Hawks have been defined by their depth as much as anybody. They basically have 6 players scoring in double digits if we round Capella up from 9.7, and that's excluding DeAndre Hunter, who was above that mark but is no longer healthy, and Cam Reddish, a former starter who's only played in 1 game this postseason due to injury. Remarkably, Atlanta's pulled off this run of the Eastern Conference Finals, while their second-best offensive player, Bogdan Bogdanovic, has been completely off throughout the playoffs, averaging just 12 points per game on 37% shooting from the field and 30% from deep. So, how have they compensated? Well, in Atlanta's Game 5 comeback against Philly, Lou Williams showed up and poured in a playoff-high 15 points in 22 minutes, demonstrating how lethal he remains in stretches as a scorer and facilitator. In Game 7, Kevin Huerter, not always a starter for this team when they're at full strength, posted 27 points on the back of remarkable difficult shot-making to lead them on an off-shooting night from Trae. Throughout the playoffs, Danilo Gallinari has also had big nights off the bench, capable of creating for himself as a mid-range artist out of the post, where he's ranked in the 83rd percentile as a scorer, while also knocking down 39% of his threes. All in all, with the exception of Solomon Hill, who's playing right now due to the Hawks' injury-afflicted wing personnel, there is nobody in their rotation who I don't like. It's the shooters around Trae who can knock down the shots he creates for them who make this offense run, and it is the ability of a number of guys to get a bucket even when Trae is off the floor that keeps this team alive. Finally, the Bucks may be the least defined by their depth out of this group, but they still go a pretty strong 8 deep. Off the bench, they get offensive punch from lethal pure shooter Bryn Forbes, who cooked the Heat for better than 15 points per game on 48% shooting from deep, and high-level post scorer and floor spacer Bobby Portis, a skilled player who's difficult to stop from anywhere. In Pat Connaughton, they also have a competitive defender and good shooter who they've trusted to play 30-plus minutes in big games, which can't normally be said for a guy who I consider to be probably their 8th best player. And while these teams have survived, some of the mighty have fallen, largely due to issues with their depth. The Lakers flat out lacked shot makers, guys who could knock down open looks or create for themselves, and they were therefore absurdly reliant on their top 2 stars, one of whom, of course, became unavailable. At times, with AD out, it felt like Talen Horton-Tucker was their best non-LeBron option in that respect, which is not great. If your supporting guys can't make shots and you have one guy who can consistently create shots, good luck. But how about the giant out east? Well, I actually like the Nets supporting cast in a world where they're entirely healthy and those guys can just fill their simple roles, but as that was far from the case this time around, their lack of creators beyond the big 3 was put on full display and it killed them. We got a lot of Mike James, who just cannot handle a legitimate load in these playoffs, and watched Kevin Durant play at a legendary level and create just about every shot for his team, while no one else around him could step up. So yes, they were abnormally unfortunate injury-wise, of course, and I think a healthy Nets team is winning the title this year, but they were also abnormally lacking in regards to their depth of creators, and it bit them. Beyond those two, even a relatively healthy, top-seeded team like the Sixers was afflicted by a lack of depth. They needed too much out of guys like Shake Milton and Tyrese Maxey, who possessed shades of the bucket-getting skill set they were looking for, but couldn't deliver consistently enough, while wing shooters like Furkan Korkmaz and Matisse Thybulle struggled to deliver reliably in the absence of Danny Green, who was out with injury. None of these teams had enough guys who they could count on, not just mindlessly to do their job, but to do a little something extra, which is what you often need in the playoffs, and they all fell in large part because of it. So, have these 4 teams shown the exclusive blueprint for contending teams going forward? No. And are the Nets or Lakers disqualified going forward as contenders? Certainly not. I think Brooklyn will be the overwhelming favorite to win it all next year, and the Lakers obviously pulled it off when healthy last season with a similarly flawed supporting cast that just happened to perform a bit better. And with a couple moves this offseason, LA will be in the thick of that title conversation again. So again, not every future postseason is going to play out exactly like this one. I don't at all think defense is more important than offense, and I don't think super teams are dead in the slightest. But I do appreciate that these teams have shown the path to building a great team without simply accumulating superstars. Get a bunch of guys you trust who can play both ends, and with a star or two at the top of it, you've given yourself a fighting chance. In an age when it feels like those areas can, at times, be neglected, it's been pretty cool to see them both shine. To those of you who have made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, you can stick around here on our YouTube channel and check out the video content that we have done previously, or listen to our podcast, which we post the full episodes of here. You can also check those out in audio form. I will link in the description to our Apple and Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter at nerd_sesh or on Instagram and TikTok at Nerd Sesh to keep posted with our content on social media. With that, as always, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed.